One of the hardest things getting out of a narcissistic relationship is actually figuring out the truth and accepting it. You might have heard a phrase passed around at times called radical acceptance. The idea of getting used to the idea of, hey, this is what actually happened. This is at times the truth of what actually was demonstrated or shown or what actually went down in the relationship. I'm going to dive into it a little bit. It corresponds a lot with some of the themes that I talk about accepting and acknowledging truth and working through that story that you're believing in your mind. So stick around. If you guys are new here, my name is Ben Taylor. I'm a self-aware narcissist on this channel to provide awareness, growth, healing, and change. We do it on all the different platforms: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Music, Amazon, Spotify, all the different places under Raw Motivation. So like, subscribe anywhere to be able to help spread awareness of what narcissism actually is and the destructive effect it has on different people's lives. If you want to hear not just my perspective, but my wife's perspective at all, check out our new podcast called Trauma, Drama, and Life. It's on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to be able to interact with you there. You can write in to ben@rawmotivations.com, or you can DM us on Instagram for some topics or some questions that you want to hear us go over specifically in each episode. We want to encourage you too to be able to get involved with a community of like-minded people to help you heal, grow, and change. And we developed the NARC app to be able to take your healing to the next level with courses, with places to track your no contact or record your truth, in a way to be able to go through and try to help you heal, grow, and change. You can get on there and you can interact with other survivors from across the globe that are able to help encourage you and give you advice through whatever you're going through. We'd love for you to be able to check that out. So you can go to NARC app, NARCAPP, narcapp.com to be able to get some more information. If you want to talk to me sometime, I would love to interact with you one-on-one to be able to help you with rewiring the mindset, to be able to break free of a trauma bond, to be able to get through the limbo land of feeling like, hey, I have peace because I'm not with this person, but it doesn't feel peaceful because it's still stuck in my head. And to get to the place where you're building healthy boundaries so you don't go back and so you don't get with a narcissistic person down the road. Well, diving in today, we want to talk about the concept of radical acceptance. You see, one of the hardest things once you've gotten away from a narcissist, or even when you're with a narcissist, is getting to the place where you actually believe that it actually happened, or that you actually believe that they don't care. Oftentimes, it's so hard for people to be able to wrap their mind around it, to be able to understand, hey, this is what actually happened in the situation, that they didn't care for me, that they don't love me, that they didn't show up, that they didn't demonstrate. And a lot of time, our mind wants to hide the trauma. It wants to push it down. It wants to hide it. It wants to go back and look at the past being like, no, they were good moments. And oftentimes it goes back to the illustration I've given of when you look down at the past, it's like looking at a mountain range. And when you're far away, you can see the first mountain and the tip of the next mountain and the peak of the next mountain, but you can't really see in between. It's not until you get up above the mountains, say you're flying across the Rocky Mountains, and you're able to see that there's a peak, and then there's a pit, and then there's another peak. And oftentimes when we look far away, all we see is the tiny peaks, the tops of them, that feel like, oh, these were good memories. But our mind wants to hide the traumatic stuff in between one good memory to the next. A lot of times people struggle to actually uncover that and figure out this is what's actually going on in the narcissistic relationship and dealing with narcissistic abuse. Oftentimes trauma is hidden, from the survivors working through it. It's hidden because it's a coping mechanism. It's a way to be able to think it wasn't that bad. It's a way to minimize the abuse. Maybe it wasn't as violent. Maybe they didn't actually hit me. Maybe all these different thoughts keep playing on. When you get away from the relationship, you're like, it really wasn't that bad. And then you realize that there was a lot more things there. You just didn't want to admit it. Sometimes people go to other extremes as far as like pushing it away, running away from the pain, jumping into another relationship to avoid any thought process of dealing with that pain. Sometimes they'll even look narcissistic on the survivor's part of compartmentalizing or disassociating from the other person or from the pain so that they don't have to accept that it actually happened. Well, when we're talking about narcissistic abuse and accepting that, we have to get to the place of acknowledging, hey, this is the truth of the situation. Regardless of what we feel, regardless of what we think, we have to get to the place where you understand this is what actually happened. And we have to acknowledge that truth. So I want to go over a couple things today is, first off, when you're getting to a radical acceptance, it's the idea of observe. Okay, because you're going to be fighting a thought. You're going to be fighting a fantasy, a false narrative that you're thinking. You have to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, what am I actually thinking? What is it, a false narrative? Is it a false story? Is it a story that I have in my head? What am I actually thinking? And then I have to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm acknowledging. Now, what's the reality of that? What can be controlled? What can be changed? What can I do? What can I not do? Is that something I have power over? I can't affect? I can't affect? Thinking through, like, what is the actual situation? Thinking through at times, what is the reason of, like, why did this actually happen? What caused it to get to this place? What caused this awful thing to happen? And then you have to start adding in practices of good self-talk, of mindfulness, of how am I actually going to show up and come in a positive way, in a positive light, because all this stuff is negative and it wants to suck me back in. So I want you to think of this. I want you to list out actions and behaviors that you would do regardless if this one thing had happened. Oftentimes we get caught up anxiety-wise with radical acceptance, with the narcissistic abuse. We get caught up with a particular thing and we don't think, hey, if this wasn't happening, how would I grow in this area? And when people are able to actually kind of separate that a little bit and be like, okay, this is happening, I hate this, but let me focus on growing this area, this tends to have less power. I want you to think, imagine what you would do if you did accept it. If you accepted the fact that this person hurt you, if you accepted the fact that this person did this and didn't care. It feels awful. I'm not saying it shouldn't feel awful, but that acceptance at times can help you start moving forward with the healing process. Sometimes you have to listen to your body, your mind, your heart, your emotions, because there's different things that your body sometimes will just tell on you. The different anxiety, the different pieces, the different gut instincts. There's different things that happen that you're like, wait a second, maybe I should actually pay attention to the things that are going on. And then you have to take a moment and allow the feelings. Allow disappointment, sadness, and acknowledge what's actually happening. So many times when we feel a negative emotion, we want to run from it as fast as possible and get away from it. And as a result, we don't really deal with it. We don't really work through the problem. We just run away from it. And as a result, the problem keeps following us a lot of times. So allowing those feelings to be able to have them, to be able to experience them, and then to acknowledge like, hey, even though I'm in this pain, even though I'm going through this awful circumstance, I can acknowledge it and I can start to turn my gaze to be towards something else. Of how can I actually heal, grow, and change? How can I focus in a different aspect that's going to help me move forward in the future? And then building up a lot of times your self-resistance of wanting to go back of like, but maybe it was this way. Well, you have to go back and you have to look at the truth. Now, a lot of times I talk about the truth and I talk about how the truth will set you free. I talk about changing the story in your mind because that's what's built a lot of times trauma bonds of people stuck in relationships because they're believing a story that's actually false. When we get underneath the surface and we question that reality of like, what is actually true? What are the facts about the situation? That's when people start coming to terms with, you know what? The facts is he didn't love me. The facts is if she came back, she would still cheat on me. The facts are this has been a habit. The facts are this is inconsistent. The facts are this wasn't demonstrated. And on we go to try to help people work to that conclusion of, hey, I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other. I'm just saying you tell me what are the facts. Now, what are we going to do with those facts? Being able to accept the reality that we don't want to accept oftentimes seems really scary and really hard. And a lot of times people are afraid of it. They're not just afraid of accepting that reality because in their head, logically, they know that exists. But a lot of times they're afraid of what the feeling is going to be. Maybe it's the disappointment, the sadness, the anger, the hurt. And sometimes that fear of feeling keeps them from actually wanting to engage with the problem, thinking that if they run away from it, they won't have to feel it. In reality, it just ends up being a ball and chain that keeps following you, and that feeling doesn't get dealt with until you deal with it. A huge part about radical acceptance is accepting the truth, dismantling the false narrative around what you're believing or thinking or understanding, and getting to the facts of the situation. Because once you understand the facts of the situation, that's the truth that's happening in that false narrative. The truth is what sets you free from a toxic person. If you're struggling with that today, would love to be able to help coach you through that and walk you through the system that we actually teach to help people break free from the narrative that they're believing that typically is a fable. and is based on a false narrative or a fantasy. My goal is to try to help give people clarity from the confusion making of being involved with a narcissistic person and help them get free from the trauma bond and from that abuse that keeps resonating and ruminating in their mind afterwards.